Bienvenue.
Welcome to meeting number 45 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. Our meeting today is on the experience of women's veterans.
A hybrid meeting. All of our witnesses are here in person with us today. We do have one member online. Just for the sake of our witnesses, you might see some questions from one of the members online, but otherwise most folks are here in the room. Before we get started today, just wanted to let everyone know that obviously we will be probably dealing with a little bit of difficult subject matter, particularly for our witnesses today. And so I wanted to just remind everybody to make sure you show some compassion for our witnesses. They are going to be sharing some very difficult experiences in some cases that they've gone through. So please show some compassion for them. And I want to just remind everybody, our witnesses and members and everyone in the room, as well as those that are with us online, that if anything that you hear today does cause you some distress, or for our witnesses, things that you're sharing, if there's help that you need from this committee, we want to make sure that those resources are available to anyone who needs them. And if you do feel that there's a need for those resources, please see our clerk, and she will help to ensure that you get the resources that you need. Just one other thing that I want to let everyone know before we get started. Our witnesses have asked that given the subject matter that we're dealing with, after following kind of the opening remarks and then the first round of questioning, we may take just a short break to allow our witnesses that opportunity. If that's okay with members, that's what we'll intend to do. We'll make it fairly short, but I think we've got some time to, and I see Ms. Blaney, you've got your hand up.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Richards. It's good to see you in the chair today. I also know you and I had a conversation earlier today about allowing a few extra minutes if our witnesses need it, if they're talking about sensitive situations. So just wanted to see what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. I think, as you mentioned, it can be difficult to share experiences that some of our witnesses may be sharing with us today. And I think, because we do have obviously a 2-hour meeting today, we have the time for it. We have generally had 1-hour panels and therefore had 5 minutes for each witness. I think in this case, certainly, let's just put it this way: I will be flexible in understanding of the need. If you're sharing something that is a very personal experience that you're sharing with us, you need a little extra time. I don't think you're going to find me to be very strict in that regard today. And I think that's probably a good guide for us in this committee during this study, particularly where we have 2-hour sessions. So thank you for raising that, Ms. Blaney. And yes, I will be quite lenient with our witnesses, probably slightly less so with you as committee members, but I also do want to let you know, as far as the witnesses, if a committee member has asked you a question, I'm going to do my best to try to give you the time that you need to answer it. Understanding, just so that we do have to respect, because every party does need to have some equal opportunity to share. So, if I've signaled it's kind of near the end of the time, I just ask that you try to wrap it up as quickly as you can. So thank you. Let me just now introduce our witnesses today. We have with us as individuals Donna Rigadel. Sorry, Donna. Major, retired. She's with us as an individual. Christine Wood, who is a veteran advocate. With the LGBT Purge Fund, Michelle Douglas, Executive Director. And with Service Women's Salute Canada, Rosemary Park, Lieutenant Commander, retired, and the founder of Service Women's Salute. And so we will go nearly in that order. I'm going to allow Ms. Wood the opportunity to wrap up the final, but we'll start with you, Ms. Rigadel, and you have 5 minutes or so to give us your opening remarks.
Thank you. I wrestled with what to say here today, given this rare opportunity. I know that many of you, either through other testimonies or through the media, have heard other stories about assault, abuse, and other mistreatment at the hands of a system that was not only not ready for women in 1988, but still is not ready today in 2023. Do I talk about my first few years? I joined at 17, assaulted, harassed, culminating one of my instructors who eventually rose to the rank of colonel, who tried to order me to give him a blowjob. Or how the men broke the lights in the hotel room where we had our course party after basic training so we wouldn't know who was touching us and be trapped in the dark. My first night at my unit, unsure and anxious, pulled aside and handed a love letter from my course officer from basic training. Or how I tried to gut it out because the military would pay for my future, even after I was first diagnosed with PTSD, on meds to help me sleep, raped by my then boyfriend, a higher-ranked unit member. I will tell a story that until a few months ago was under a publication ban. When I was 21, I went on my last course I would ever take as an NCM. It was in Kingston, and Kingston had just introduced co-ed barracks. From day one, I did not feel good about this course. The first morning at PT, my sergeant, who was in the position of course warrant, ordered me to run up front there with him. Linemen were scaling the outside of the building to get into our room when we were sleeping at night. I had to buy new underwear halfway through the first week because somebody had stolen all of mine out of the dryer. I was struggling. That previous year, I'd been in a car accident. A friend of mine had died in my arms. The first time my new boyfriend and I at that point had sex, I was so drunk I couldn't stand, let alone consent. So I went to the MIR and requested to be RTU'd. They gave me a day of bed rest and told me to come back the next day. My sergeant came to my room to talk to me about going home. I told him everything, all my struggles, my PTSD, the meds that I hated taking, all of it. He was kind and compassionate and encouraged me to stay and finish the training, that it was important to my career. I was comforted to know that he cared. My roommates came in after dismissal that day, all excited, and said the sergeant had ordered them to take me out that night to help me relax. I thought, what's the harm? The whole course came out. We all drank a lot. It was a good time. My sergeant even showed up at the end of the night, told everybody that he would see me back safely. I don't remember the reason that he gave me for having to go to his room first. I just remember wanting to sleep as he took off some of my clothes. I was so tired and I kept closing my eyes. I said I wanted to leave, and he just held me down. Again, this was somebody that not only had my career in his hand, but many times in my life. I was so tired, and I just said I wanted to leave. I was half naked when I told him that I couldn't do this anyway. I was on my period. He said he didn't believe me, but he would check, and if I was, he would let me go. I squeezed my eyes shut so that he could put his fingers inside of me. Tampon and blood. He let me go. The next day, I realized that now I couldn't claim to be too stressed to leave. I was trapped. I had to explain that I was staying to that very sergeant. He smiled at me and said that I looked under the weather and reminded me to eat a well-balanced breakfast, and then he winked at me. I had another 3 weeks on course with that person. When I got home, I asked for a leave of absence. I needed to process. I knew that I couldn't come into work anymore and see everybody in uniform. It was just too hard. So I was told by my chief clerk to come in and sign the paperwork. My chief clerk was a female. She took me aside and told me I was a slut, a whore, an administrative burden, and I needed to get out before they threw me out. I quit the CAF that January 1997. I came back in April of 2006. I had a few great years, and then more assaults, harassment, and abuse. Not a day passes when I haven't seen the faces of men and women that used my kindness, my compassion, and often my own pain to abuse and harm me. So what can we change about that? Since 2014, I've changed my focus on training and education around supporting survivors of sexual assault. The single biggest indicator if somebody will suffer long-term effects is the support they receive at first disclosure of the incident. It's not who did it. It's not the injuries they receive. It's the first time they have the courage to say that something terrible happened to them. How they are responded to will set the stage for how they recover. In 2014, there was no mandatory training on how to support somebody disclosing military sexual trauma. There still isn't. Being raped should not cost you your career. My daughter and I left her abusive dad finally in 2017. She carries scars on her soul that I would have been able to prevent if I wasn't so hobbled by my own pain. One of the last times I saw him, he said I should have told him that I was raped because he never would have married me if he'd known I was broken. In spring 2021, 4 female survivors got together and we created a group. We call ourselves Survivor Perspectives Consulting Group. In my final year in uniform, I trained almost 2,000 members of the CAF on how to support those victimized and how to recognize the earlier roots of that behavior. We've taught brand new recruits up to 3-star generals. In our post-training survey, 83% of those trained say that they now know how to support someone. 98% so far have said this should be CAF-wide. In my last year in uniform, I received a CDS commendation for creating this program. And I got a letter from Lieutenant General Carignan saying that the CAF leadership sees no value in institutionalizing this training. None of the leadership from CPCC or the CDS's office have taken this training. I was medically released due to PTSD from MST on 30 March 2022. Our group has grown and continues to bring this training package to everyone that we can to use our education, our skills, and yes, our pain to hopefully bring change to the CAF. We have met obstacle after obstacle. We don't understand why the leadership would not be interested in a solution that's obviously resonating. To date, we have trained over 3,000 members and continue to grow. Looking ahead, we've applied for the Veterans Wellness Grant and are hopeful. The ask. What we need is more women-centered programming. OSIS, Soldier On, and Wounded Warriors are not yet made for us. They do occasionally try to host bolt-on programs and pop-ups, but they don't have women, veteran, dedicated retreats or treatment. Even small things, like a benefit to join a facility that offers female-only areas for working out, would be a huge stride. Leadership in all areas also must stop working with service providers with no qualifications or expertise to work in these areas because people are being hurt. As a service provider, I'd also say that the RFP process should prioritize veteran-owned enterprise. Right now, when you're medically released from the CAF, there's 2 avenues that you're encouraged to take. One is to be employed as soon as possible. I was told flat out when I released, you're heavily employable. I have 16 years as a public affairs officer in the CAF. But I don't want to go back to the career where I was assaulted and abused. My only other option really is to go for education and training for about 2 years and hopefully go into something else. What I would like is to see some of that money that's earmarked for training also be allowed to be accessed by people that have started their own businesses as entrepreneurs. The money's already there. It's just a matter of changing the way we can access it. In the U.S., a certain percentage of contracts each year are required to go to veteran-owned businesses. Our group is trying very hard to have an empowering and validating career after the uniform. We've built a powerful tool. Our training changes minds. We've seen it over 3,000 times. We're determined to make the CAF, the RCMP, the government, and Canada a stronger, more inclusive place. We don't understand why the CAF seems so intent on quashing our efforts, but we persist, because standing up to them is not new to us. We have looked into the eyes of men and women that raped us, harassed us, and beat us down. We're bent but not broken, and we're not going anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rigadel, for sharing your personal experiences with us and for coming to us with some recommendations. That's appreciated. And we will now give the opportunity to have the floor to Ms. Douglas from the LGBT Purge Fund. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'd like to start by giving you a bit of background. I'm a veteran. I'm also a survivor of Canada's LGBT Purge. The LGBT Purge is described by the Canadian Museum for Human Rights as one of the longest running and largest scale violations of the human rights of any workforce in Canadian history. I would also add, and hardly anyone knows about it. Between the 1950s and the 1990s, thousands, we estimate about 9,000 people, 2S LGBTQ people in the Canadian military, the RCMP, and the federal public service saw their careers stymied or terminated because of their sexual orientation or gender identity was considered a threat to the country they had chosen to serve. During the Cold War and well beyond, this discriminatory process was often justified on the grounds of national security risks, given my purported character weakness and susceptibility to blackmail by foreign agents, despite lack of any evidence that such coercion had ever occurred. This shattered lives and careers. The purge resulted in psychological trauma, material hardships, financial ruin, self-harm, suicide. And I understand a lot about this shameful period in Canadian history because I was purged from the military in 1989. I joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1986. I was so honored and proud to serve. I wanted to be a police officer within the military, and I did just that, graduating at the top of my class within the military police branch. I had my sworn badge and also my commission as a young second lieutenant. But one day, when I was posted to the Special Investigations Unit, the very unit within the military police where I was posted on my first posting because I had graduated at the top of my class and they wanted this as an honoring. This unit was devoted to the investigation, conduct of most serious criminal investigations, including sabotage, subversion, espionage, and allegations of homosexuality. Shortly after I joined this special investigation unit, my boss called me into his office. He told me we were going for an investigative trip up to Ottawa from CFB Toronto. I followed him in an undercover K car. I was dressed in civilian clothes. Just as we got out to the Toronto airport, he pulled into a hotel along the airport strip. And I was interrogated there about my sexual orientation for the next 2 days. This was just the start of my my interrogation about my sexual orientation. Later, I was flown by the police to Ottawa to be polygraphed about my sexual orientation. And while I was seated, strapped to the polygraph chair, I admitted that I had fallen in love with women. I later found out that the questions they intended to ask me, had I proceeded with that, included this very offensive opening question: had I ever licked the private parts of another woman? I'm so grateful today they didn't ask me that question. My experience left me humiliated and shamed. Others also experienced similar questions, being deeply sexualized in their nature. I was also forced to come out to my family. I was given 24 hours to do so, or the police would be sent to do it for me. Ultimately, despite graduating at the top of every military course I ever took, I was fired. These experiences have had a lifelong effect on me and the thousands of others who went through them. On my release records are these words: not advantageously employable due to homosexuality. Well, I sued the military for this treatment, and in 1992, it was my legal challenge that formally ended the policy of discrimination against 2 LGBTQI people serving their country in the Canadian Armed Forces. Well, I only served about 3 years, but I am now a veteran, and it's been my life work for 30 years to try to bring some justice, along with many others, to these forgotten survivors and veterans. A class action lawsuit in 2018 led to a settlement for more than 700 people who were found and located and could get some justice. Even justice delayed sometimes is still justice. Today, I work full-time to pursue reconciliation and memorialization efforts arising from this period of history. I work closely with and see the impact, particularly on women purge survivors. They are veterans and they're hurting. In fact, most of the people we see have very unique and special needs as veterans. The trust was shattered by their employer and their country. Many experienced sexualized violence. We also know that many who were part of the purge class action were also part of the military sexual trauma class action lawsuit as well. Think about the shame and the deep traumatization at the hands of the government. We owe these special veterans a duty of care, and that goes beyond legal settlements. The establishment of the Office of Women and 2S LGBTQI Veterans at Veterans Affairs has been a really good start. We need some help in finding these veterans. Sometimes the shame drove them back into the closet. We know people took their own lives. We know that the shame was so deep that many just have never surfaced again. But we want to try to find them because we think we can help them. Needs that cannot be met by other social service agencies because they simply don't know what happened, can be met by organizations that are tailored, including this Office of Women and 2S LGBTQI Veterans. Education is a huge part of this. We can't have someone calling in for the first time to finally reach out and get some help from VAC and then be told it's impossible to imagine a story like that would ever happen in Canada. And then they get rejected again, and that's the last we ever see of these people. Trans women veterans are especially vulnerable. We have to be there for them. They can't be ignored, and we must, as we do with all veterans, honor, support, and respect them. We're seeing an aging group of survivors. Some are angry. They're just so unsure who they can trust. We're also seeing rising levels of addiction, senior squalor, homelessness, precarious home lives. This, of course, is recognizable as the impact of trauma, pain, and just of the betrayal from the government. I'm here to hopefully talk about the elimination of hurdles and barriers to allow these veterans to access the services that they need, because we owe them nothing less. I'd be happy to speak further with you about these incredible Canadian women and all purge survivors and how the committee might address their needs. My final words will be to these incredible survivors, women who've served their country so heroically, and to my colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Kathy Potts, who's also joined me here today. Chair, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and for the courage in sharing your personal experiences with us as well. And now we'll turn to Rosemary Park, the founder of Servicewomen's Salute Canada. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee and my colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to appear as a witness for this committee study on the experience of women veterans. I understand this is a study of women veterans, first study of women veterans by a House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. And if so, I say congratulations and I say thank you. I applaud your undertaking this large assignment. I don't think you can cast the net any wider in the scope of issues and experiences the study seeks to understand about what it means for women to choose to serve Canada. In my presentation today in this session titled Recruiting and Life in the Forces, I'd like to respectfully ask and add a parallel question. What does it mean for Canada for women to choose to serve? Canada. What extraordinary talent base do servicewomen represent and offer as a unique cohort for Canada's democracy, her defence and security, civil society, and economic development, and now environmental adaptation strategic requirements? And then conversely, what happens when the Canadian Armed Forces fails to assess and seize this opportunity for the past 55 years? To repeatedly choose to not have a dedicated strategic plan valuing and optimizing the inclusion of service women for the past 55 years. This speaks volumes, and in my opinion, is being represented in witness testimonies before you. On December 13th, 2021, the official apologies by the Minister of National Defence, Deputy Minister, and Chief of Defence Staff following the $850 million D&D CAF sexual misconduct class action lawsuit, excuse me, did not include the words servicewomen, servicewoman, male or female. Not once. LGBTQ, yes, but women, not once. What are they spending $850 million on? Sorry, minus $50 million for men. We are an invisible force, and what a waste. What a loss to Canada. The 4 PowerPoint slide views I provided the clerk of the committee for you are my very brief representation of key challenges and outcomes I have reported over the past 51 years, understanding and acting on servicewomen's inclusion in the Canadian Armed Forces and the inclusion of women veterans in Canada's larger society. The one-page bio I submitted to the committee clerk describes some of this involvement as a military researcher in my national, provincial, and local community service, as founder of Servicewomen's Salute, Hommage aux Femmes Militaires, that now operates as a proxy military association to know, honour, care, and strengthen the contribution of service women to Canada. Because there is nothing else. And as project manager for the past 5 years at the Centre of International and Defence Policy at Queen's University, the Servicewomen's Salute Portal Project. A second document I provided the clerk describes the 34 specific problem-solving projects undertaken by Servicewomen's Salute and Queen's University since 2017. Generally speaking, The projects describe the gaps we have identified and corrective action we have implemented in research knowledge, CAF, lack of record keeping, inclusion, and valuing of servicewomen, the lack of commemoration and celebration of servicewomen's military service, and the lack of responsive local community services. I won't be surprised if the 4 thematic areas chosen by the committee, from women's physical and mental health to initiatives developed in allied countries, focus on and produce recommendations, and I quote here, to implement the best possible support measures for women veterans. My expectation is the recommendations will seek to support women veterans as individuals and their individual well-being. They are laudable. I can only urge the committee and as elected representatives to think how your recommendations can take on larger strategic value and impact as well. This is a Canadian problem. This is for Canada, and what a waste. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final witness to provide opening remarks, Ms. Wood, the floor is yours for 5 minutes or so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good day to everyone here. I'll begin by expressing gratitude to the committee for acknowledging and exploring the sex and gender-specific differences that can result in inequitable health outcomes for servicewomen and women veterans as a specific and unique group. It's been said already, this study has been a long time coming, and I am thrilled to be here with you today. Mr. Chair, I joined the CAF when I was 31 years old, in the best shape of my life, physically and mentally. As the shortest and the smallest person in my platoon, I wore the same size rucksack and carried the same equipment as a large man would wear. After 15 grueling weeks, I left St. Jean with my commission as an officer, along with stress fractures and plantar fasciitis in both feet. Took 5 months of physiotherapy to get my feet back up and running, get me back up and running. And I think that most Canadians, maybe you, would be shocked to learn that so far, my 2 feet alone have cost VAC almost $50,000 to treat and compensate me for. I think that's a ridiculous amount of money for a problem that is preventable. More serious than feet, ill-fitting equipment also, at best, aggravated, and at worst, fully caused pelvic floor weakness. It's led to serious reproductive complications for me. I've had high-risk pregnancies, 1 miscarriage, 1 preterm birth, a prolapsed bladder, and ongoing stress and bowel incontinence. I am 44 years old, and I often have to wear a disposable piece of adult underwear because a panic attack or a nightmare can lead to an accident. And I could be extremely humiliated about sharing that. It's difficult, but I believe it's important for everybody to understand what the real costs are to people like me when our systems keep making women-specific issues invisible. And invisible is a word that I think rings true for a lot of us. My experience with VAC has been that I feel invisible. My injuries are invisible. We know that servicewomen are disproportionately targeted with sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, sexual violence, gender-based discrimination, and abuse of power. I experienced the full gamut of sexual misconduct in the first 18 months of my service, and by far the most damaging was a sexual assault 18 months in that resulted in me developing post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder presents physically for me. It comes out somatically, and I think this is something that is especially true for women as opposed to men, and I think this is something that the VAC table of disabilities, that all-important document, does not recognize. Mental pain leads to physical pain. So we know that, say someone had arthritis in their back. They're inactive. They may become isolated. And then they may become depressed or anxious. And that makes sense to all of us. But the reverse is also true. So that someone who is depressed or anxious becomes inactive and isolated. And then their body falls apart. That's exactly what's happened to me. The bottom line is that I have been diagnosed with more than 10 distinct physical health illnesses since being assaulted that will require lifelong monitoring and treatment. And that includes restless leg syndrome, type 1 diabetes, which came out of nowhere at age 36, chronic migraines, fibromyalgia, sexually transmitted infection, pelvic floor and reproductive issues, sexual dysfunction, low back pain, arthritis in my neck, extreme sensitivity to sound and light, sleep apnea, tinnitus. That's just the physical. And it is all directly related and interconnected with the fact that I have been in a state of hypervigilance for 12 years. I haven't put in claims with VAC for all of these conditions because, as I said, I feel like VAC cannot see me and my disabilities. They do not recognize them as being related to my service. It's a waste of my time and my energy. But my health keeps worsening as my conditions go untreated. And every physical application, every application for benefits for a physical condition that I've put in, aside from the feet, which was clear, has been denied outright, and I have had to appeal. I'm aware of the time. Mr. Chair, I'd like to speak with this committee about ways forward. I'd like to speak about the creation of external advisory committees. I want to add my voice to the growing chorus of calls for VAC to release their gender-based analysis report that we have yet to see. I'd also like to see them make their Canadian-funded research available publicly. I would like to see this committee recommend the creation of a comprehensive system of medical care that will meet women's needs, talking about inpatient care, outpatient care. I have been talking about this for 7 years, but I am happy to keep talking because one day we will make this happen. There's so much more that I could say, but I will end here in saying that I am open to answering your questions, even if they feel uncomfortable for you to ask, because we cannot change what we can't name. We can't be shy about this. So I urge you to make strong recommendations to VAC based on our testimony and those who will follow. so that VAC becomes transparent and open and able to meet the sex and gender specific needs of servicewomen and women veterans like myself, because I don't want anyone else to struggle the way I have. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and I can only imagine how difficult it would have been for you to share some of your personal experiences. And again, because we've wrapped up the opening statements, I want to thank all of you once again for your courage in bringing your personal experiences to us, and I know that that'll be valuable, incredibly valuable to this committee and the work that we're doing. So thank you for being willing to share your experiences and the courage to do so. We're now going to move to the first round of questions, and just for the benefit of our witnesses, these are prearranged and predetermined rounds of questioning. Ms. Blaney?
So I think you said that we were going to have a quick break after this, so I'm just clarifying that.
What I was going to do was have the first round of questioning and then allow an opportunity for a bit of a brief break, unless our witnesses, are you comfortable with proceeding to a first round of questioning? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's fine. We can take the break now instead. That's fine. I can appreciate that. No, please don't apologize. Please not at all. We appreciate and we understand the need for that, and so we'll take a 3 to 5 minute break, and then we'll come back for the questioning from the members. Meeting suspended. We'll call the meeting back to order, and we'll start with our first round of questioning from members. And just for the benefit of our witnesses, how this works is each member will get opportunities based on a predetermined order of questions by party. And the members are, very strictly kind of limited to keep things fair to a certain length of time. And in the first round, that's 6 minutes per member. So I will encourage them, of course, to try to use their time wisely to allow you the opportunity to answer the questions that they're asking. However, I will try to be flexible a little bit if you need a few seconds to try and answer something that's, you need to get the rest of the information out. But we'll try to hold them to it as best as we can. And we'll start the first round of questioning with Karen Vecchio for 6 minutes.
Thanks very much. And I would really like to thank Donna, Rosemary, Michelle, and Christine for coming here and sharing these stories. I'm very fortunate because I get to sit on the Status of Women Committee, where we have done some reports on this and looking at the Canadian Armed Forces. Michelle, that's how I've met you, was talking about the LGBTQ Purge Fund and the importance of that, and talking about what it was like, the sexuality issues that we had in there. Christine, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. I can only imagine how difficult it is. But when we're talking about simple things such as an OBGYN that might be there as a doctor that could serve you, what type of doctors service the people in the Canadian Armed Forces, specifically women? Is there OBGYNs? Are there people that know the female body as well as other doctors?
My guess would be no.
Okay.
I never saw an OBGYN following the assault. I've only had a family doctor since my release, and I actually just lost my family doctor. She closed her practice. And this is a huge concern now for me, is I don't know how to get referrals. And managing my health is so complex. I have a lot of specialists. I need a family doctor to keep everything organized in one place. I know maybe one of the other. Donna, do you have a more better idea about CAF?
I do, just
physicians
because
and-
my release was about a year ago.
Yes.
So I can tell you that my last well woman's, they call them well woman's test, I was referred to a GYN outside of the military. So no, they don't have specialists within the military, at least within where I went. So I was in Winnipeg, Edmonton, and then Ottawa. And so we were referred to outside practitioners. I'm in the same boat as Christine, though, since my release. I don't have a family doctor. And so I've had to go to pop up, PAP clinics and that kind of thing, just to try to sort of bridge the gap. But yeah.
I just think that's very important, because when we're looking at the whole well-being of a female working in the Canadian Armed Forces, that's really important. You spoke of endometriosis and all of these other things that happen, right? So how important it is to make sure that we're taking care of for women in the OBGYN.
And I want to just touch into, as of the last time I looked into it, they do not have sexual assault exams on most of the bases, including the more isolated ones. So it's on the survivor to make their way to a major center to get that done.
So there would be no rape kits, there'd be no
There'd be nobody
like that.
trained to do it either. And that is, again, last time I checked, including on board ships and in isolated deployments.
One of the recommendations that we did make in our last study was ensuring that the people who are coming forward to bring forward their story are not receiving, there's no negative consequences. Have you heard of any change in the Canadian Armed Forces that are protecting our victims and safeguarding them?
There is no standard across the board on what happens. There are still so many gaps and so many people that are being that are having negative repercussions to coming forward, either officially or mostly non-officially, or being at a loss, not knowing where the file is going, not knowing anything like that. It's definitely a mixed bag. Does anybody else have?
Yes, I do remember. This is reading an article from 2018. A team went to Latvia to see to do a GBA plus analysis on the area, and they found that there was one person who was able to administer a rape kit it was a man, and my question is, well, what if that man is the rapist? What do you do? Yeah.
Thanks so much. And I think that goes to so much. Donna had even talked about it when the person above you is in charge, and that's the person who's either sexually assaulted you, harassed you, any of these types of things. So one of my questions is, have they done anything when it comes to if you're making a complaint in the Canadian Armed Forces on sexual misconduct, when it comes to people who are generals or those wearing the flag, have they done anything where there's any suspensions to this date or during this investigation? If there's any suspensions of those potential alleged perpetrators.
I mean, I know that we can say, looking at what happened to General Fortin, they definitely pull them back out of places. But then, of course, the end result is that now they're being sued for doing that.
I think there's just so many. How many minutes? 1 minute. There's just so many things that we have to unpackage here, right? Because it's from the time that you're in the Canadian Armed Forces where you're treated maybe like a human sometimes, but we know that you're told what to do all the time. And then if we do not divide it between male versus female, if you're not having the proper care, if you're not having all of those things, no one's there to have your back. So when you are, I'm sorry, I'm sitting here going flabbergasted because I look at you, Christine, and I'm so sorry that you've been treated this way. And it's even difficult for me to ask questions because I'm thinking, how did we go wrong here? How did we allow you to end up where you are? You're only a few years younger than me. How did this happen? And so really, I don't have a question, but more of a comment. We can do better, and I think the recommendations that you're bringing forward are very, very important. Anything to do with sexual assault, we know the trauma. We know that it's decades, and if we do not deal with it immediately, that we're going to have what you're just defining today. So I thank you very, very much, and I will cede my time. Thank you.
Can I just touch on one small
please
thing?
Go ahead, yeah.
So I can tell you, as I spoke earlier, that first response and that sort of support at disclosure is so important. I know that my chain of command, as a result of one of my sexual assaults, sent my chaplain over to talk to me, who are considered sort of service providers and able to provide counseling. His response to me when I told him, he asked me how things were going. I was on exercise when it happened. I was still on exercise then. I said I was having really bad dreams, and his response was I sure on some level I wasn't sexually aroused by the whole experience? And that was the expert.
Did you want to add something brief, Ms. Park? If you'd like to briefly, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These examples that we're sharing, I know there are two sort of features of it. One, that as veterans, we don't know what is happening. And this sharing of information, there is a great deal of work being spent, but we aren't being informed about this, about changes that are being tried.
Thank you for that. And we'll move to our next round here, which will go to Rechi Valdez for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your bravery, for your honesty, and ultimately your testimony will, I believe it, make a difference in this important study. And I'm truly thankful and grateful for your service. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll direct my questions to Christine Wood. Karen, I'm going to try to unpack. Here we go. Mrs. Wood, in your testimony, you discussed several examples where you had that impacted you negatively with your physical health. When you were seeking medical assistance, could you walk us through what that experience was like when you were seeking it from VAC? Or from, yeah. Or
I'm
from,
sorry, the assistance I received from VAC?
Yeah.
It's a fight. It's a battle to get anything approved, because my primary condition that VAC recognizes is post-traumatic stress disorder. And because they don't recognize the physical consequential illnesses to PTSD, especially in women, I've been denied physiotherapy or chiropractor, or like they're allowed to work on my feet, but not allowed to touch any other part of my body because I have a claim that's been accepted for my feet. I've gone months without hearing from a case manager. when they say that they'll get back to me. So I haven't received a lot of help, and I would say that most of my resources either came with the assistance of my family doctor and friends who were able to help recommend places. But it's just like if you look at my VAC file online, it's like denied for vocational rehab assistance for musculoskeletal injuries or pain or whatever. It's just denied.
I'm not sure what the portal looks like, but when you submit the claim and request, I'm sure you're attaching evidence of, x-rays or whatnot. And even after that, you will get denied. I just want to confirm.
Yes, that's 100% true. My migraine application, for example, one migraine resulted in a small blind spot in my left eye, and I have the paperwork from like the eye specialists that I had to see after to make sure it wasn't growing or had it gone away. It's still there. It's permanent. And even with that information and records of hospital visits to get hospital, like ER treatment for a migraine, that was 3 days long. Even then, they would deny. And I almost think it's a matter of practice. Like I don't want to be too skeptical, but at this point, after so many years, I can't help it. Do they just deny most claims outright and hope that you will not appeal? Most people view VAC as Canada's meanest insurance company. Like most women veterans that I know, most veterans I know, they're an insurance company.
You mentioned external advisory committees as one of your recommendations. I was hoping you could elaborate on that idea and how that would help.
Yeah, I'm happy to, because the Sexual Misconduct Support and Resource Center, I sit on their external advisory council with subject matter experts like judges and professors and just experts in the field of sexual trauma. And I've seen firsthand the benefit of that kind of an advisory council and the advice that they can provide to an organization. And so I would like to see an external advisory council, much like the SRCs, develop for VAC, so that we can bring in external subject matter experts and some people with lived experience to help guide VAC on its policy. I would like to see the creation of a women's veterans external advisory council. It is mostly comprised of women veterans, and having that opportunity to engage with VAC at that level to provide feedback and to make sure that the programs and the resources and things that they're designing are actually going to meet our needs. Because when programs and such are designed without that, then it's a waste of money and it's just a Band-Aid solution. So bringing in that external participation, it works. I've seen it work. And VAC is very insular. VAC doesn't really talk with the CAF. That's another group. I'd like to see service women and women veterans together and then bring in some people from both sides, because, I mean, we're acting like CAF and VAC like two separate things, but it's not. It's one system flowing back and forth. So, yeah, that external advice is invaluable. There are really smart people out there, and they have a lot to contribute, and they want to, because they care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pour le prochain tour, nous avons...
For the next turn, Luc Desilets, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Your testimony is very touching. You are of an extraordinary courage. I wasn't expecting this today. And I'm one of the 2 who submitted this topic for a study. But I did not expect it to be so moving. And I was listening, and I felt shame as a man. It might sound silly. I hope you understand. Shame is what I felt. And I want to tell you that I'm sure some of you understand how a committee such as ours works. You have great power, and that will show in the recommendations made. So I'm going to ask each of you, if you were in our shoes, what would be the topmost or the 2 most important recommendations you would like to see in the study? Because all 4 of you are agents of change. We are just, sort of poor, modest MPs on this committee. And we, would love to and have hope to make change regardless of our political party allegiance. Ms. Parks, I have a question. You have written a great deal. So we have the interpretation. We are in a supposedly bilingual country. Ms. Park, you can hear me properly? Good. You have written numerous articles. You have an impressive CV. Now, amongst the studies you've done and all of your readings, is there exemplary country or a country with best practices when we talk about sexual misconduct? I don't want to minimize this, but I think this is a problem, or I imagine it's a problem in every army in this world. Now, are there any countries that have really dwelled on this and said enough is enough? We're thinking, of Canada and Quebec. We have a new minister now who wants to make a difference. Now, where in this world is somebody doing something intelligent?
C'est normal.
No. Yeah, you can answer me in English if you prefer.
No. No. What we do see in other countries are women veterans acting and organizing to assert themselves, not as individuals, as the moral voices that we have here, but coordinated pushback. So we do see in other countries the involvement of women themselves. We have done this with the class action, but they are much more involved, and I would cite the states in particular. So that, but have the militaries? No.
Mais est-ce qu'il y a des gouvernements?
But what about governments? What about governments? What about, ministries of defense? Are there any proactive in any other countries of the world? Sure, go ahead. This is not a specific problem to the military. It's a problem of humanity. So,
To address this with a military solution, we fail. okay, because it's not a military problem. We can't discipline this problem away, we can't punish it away. And every military that's integrated in the world struggles with this, and we are all failing at it. And the reason why is because we haven't switched to a survivor-centered, trauma-informed approach. So we haven't gotten to the point where instead of right away rushing to how do we arrest the perpetrator and charge them in a criminal justice system that, let's face it, fails and is not set up to do anything really effective, instead, we switch right away to how do we support the survivor to start them on the path to healing, to start them on the path to either returning to service, if that's what they want, mentally healthy, or cycling out, but again, mentally supported and feeling like we've got their back. How do we do that? And it's until we crack on with that it's going to start to accomplish things. Where we're failing is we don't do that, and we also introduce training systems that don't make sense. The one...
Faut que je vous arrête, là.
I have to stop you because I don't think you could stop yourself. But I'll tell you, what concerns me so much is the culture, how to change the culture. And it exists everywhere in the planet. I understand that. But in Quebec, in Canada, isn't there a sensitivity? We are a very large humanistic country, and there's an opportunity, perhaps. Go ahead.
Did it time for me?
Sorry, it's the end of Mr. Desile's time, but please answer.
I believe that as a military, as a country, we have an opportunity to become the leader in this, to get to the point that other militaries and other countries are coming and saying, shoot, how did the Canadians do this? We have to do that, though, by making training that makes sense. So that can't be a point and click. You have to get in and engage and discuss and start to shift people's moral compass, because we have to get to the point where as a military we can continue to do our, let's face it, inappropriate job of being better at war than the enemy, but do so with professionalism and respect. And that's where we've lost it. So the only way to get back to it, again, is to address the human wearing the uniform, not just the uniform. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And our next intervention will be from Ms. Blaney for the next 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for your service. And I feel really sad and disappointed that we still live in a country and in a world where we have to ask people to come and bleed in front of us. And I just want to say that part of our job is to listen, but a bigger part of our job is to believe. And I just want to say I believe very much what all of you testified today. And I'm very, very honored that you took up that space and were here with us today to do that. So what I felt was really impactful was how many times I heard the word invisible by the testimony that was said today, and that we have a system that, of course, seems to continually make women's realities invisible, and that impact is having a particular one in the service of our military. So my first question, and I'm going to ask all of you and start first with Donna, is one of the things that I've heard again and again is that when you come to VAC, it's like you have to prove everything that happened to you so that they will treat you for it on the other side at VAC. And if they don't believe you, which goes back to my original statements, then it's really hard. So then you're denied and you have to appeal and appeal. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that experience and what the impact is and any recommendations you have on changing that.
I think one of the major changes that happened, and it happened after the class action, was having more dedicated staff, specifically managing these files. I don't know about everybody else's experience, but mine sat, my claim for PTSD sat for about 2.5, 3 years until they introduced like the dedicated system, and then it was more fast-tracked, both because of the class action it was required, but also because they had staff that was trained in what to look for. Because sexual assault remains something that is really hard for people to come forward and talk about, it remains underreported, and that's men and women. We know that they're assaulted at great numbers and don't come forward for this for a lot of very specific reasons. So knowing that they don't come in with proof, knowing that they don't come in necessarily having talked to a doctor or even making a police report, that needs to be, again, more education, more trauma-informed, understanding that, you know what, no, we're not going to have all the paperwork that we might have if we break a leg or if we suffer some kind of physical, foot injury or something like that, but that doesn't make our injury any less valid.
Rosemary? I'm going to turn it to the unknown. VAC only has approximately 14% of women who are receiving benefits. The invisibility is of women who have served and are not known to VAC, or think because of the issues that they don't deserve to be considered as veterans. And Dr. Maya Eichler has commented on that it's a self-defeating problem where there is this I don't deserve. And so VAC is trying to reach out, but its methods are, it's a very difficult task for a government to create a sense of trust that we do care and please apply and we're here to listen. I don't envy that, but I think we have the 14% with the difficulty, as you say, of showing that this is warranted, because there are not the examples of precedent. This is new. These are new decisions being made. It's a ever-changing landscape. But in particular, one of the problems, and it is for men and women, is when they have served under certain policies, and the decisions about about their release have been decided at that point in time. Mm-hmm. When the policies change, it doesn't affect them. They're stuck to the old one.
Thanks for raising that question. I think it's a great one, and I'm going to pick up on what others have said. Veterans Affairs Canada needs to do a lot more outreach to put television ads and some social media. We find we can put things all day on Twitter, but it's just not reaching purge survivors who were fired in the 70s and 80s, who are aging now and aren't as familiar with social media. And they don't know what services might even be provided to them. So it's not only that they don't deserve the support, but they probably think in many cases that they don't qualify for support. So many of us who were purged were were fired often very quickly, with a lot of shame, no sense of any community. In fact, the military pushed people very, very far away. And people were so ashamed, they also didn't seek comfort in family. They may have been rejected there too, had the reason for their dismissal and their firing been known to some family members. So these people are really alone, and trust is hard to be built. Lesbians now that went through this purging, also trans women, we didn't even know that we were deemed veterans, that the definition had changed, so people haven't come forward. But we have to find these people. I think that's a duty we owe these kinds of veterans. And then if they do make that call to be super trauma-informed, to be survivor-centered, as was said, and to tell them how much they're going to be respected, that whoever's receiving them is aware of the history. It's not hard to learn this history. We're doing literally thousands of micro outreach opportunities. And the other thing I would say is that Veterans Affairs Canada could help us by respectfully connecting survivors of the purge to outside organizations that are bringing peers together, that are, directing them to other resources that might be there, that just gives them a sense that they're not alone, that their privacy can still be respected, but that other people with common experiences are around. Most don't even know that exists, and we'd love to find them and just tell them how loved they are, how valued they are, and how much we respect their service. This is another kind of woman veteran who is so invisible. They're even sometimes ashamed to come out to other veterans in case they get a really bad experience and are pushed away, probably for the last time.
Okay, so we're well past the time for this round, but I did see Miss Wood had her hand up and was wanting to get a chance to respond. If you can do so as briefly as you can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to be brief, I just connect so much with what you've all said. I think there's a challenge in finding and reaching our legacy veterans, and a more low-tech approach may be needed to find them. More visits to smaller places, more advertising on television. Another group that I believe struggles to self-identify as veterans are people like myself who were injured early on in their career. There are some people who are injured in basic training. There are people like myself who were severely injured 18 months in, and I did not start calling myself a veteran for about 5 years. And I was absolutely embarrassed to say that I had served because I left after being assaulted. I felt ashamed that I had left. I gave up. I didn't stay in for 20 years and fight it. I gave up. I've heard Michelle say this before. I've done more outside of the military to better the military than I ever could have in it. I'll end there, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Merci. C'est la fin de la première.
And that's the end of the first round of questions. And now we'll start our second round. And we'll begin with Ms. Kathy Wagenthal, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. You guys okay? Yeah? Okay, great. I've been here on this committee I'm in my 8th year. I just got to draw some attention to something here. Your testimony should be the key thing in determining what we recommend and what the government does. And what I find is people come here and share, but it isn't, you have to have the experts, you need to have the advisory councils, all these things. But all of those things should wrap around what is heard here. And that is not happening, and it needs to happen. So thank you so much. You guys are amazing. I just want to speak to you, Donna, about Survivor Perspectives Consulting Group. I sat up reading and going through and highlighting, and it is remarkable. It is a remarkable approach to dealing specifically with this military sexual trauma issue. I'm just going to very quickly read. Your mission statement says social change needs a movement that cannot be mandated with rules and orders. It needs to be through honest and direct engagement and putting the humanity of our members first. You guys, from what you're saying, you understand the role of military. It's rules and orders. It's jump. It's don't jump. And all of a sudden, we're talking about humanity here. You're all assets, in a way, right? And I loved this comment that I would like you to respond to. Warrant Officer Carolyn Edwards, who works with you. I like how the workshop highlights that you can still be a badass warrior and have empathy. Listening with empathy and showing compassion does not weaken us as soldiers. It strengthens us all to be better, stronger, and a more well-rounded force. Go women, right? So that thinking is totally contrary to those who, as you mentioned here, you received a CDS commendation for creating this program and then a letter telling you that the Canadian Armed Forces leadership sees no value in instituting your training. Would you please talk about that?
Yeah, that was a weird week. Yes, we've continued. Obviously, since I left the military, my last day in uniform was actually 30 March 2022. So we've continued to do training with people that will bring us on board. We've done it for pay and we've done it for not pay. We're just happy to bring it forward. It was unfortunate. What we were told was that because they already had existing CAF training that hit on many of the points, our training wasn't valuable. Whereas my response was, that's the way that it was designed. If it's survivor-centered and trauma-informed, you're going to hit the same messaging. The power in our training is that it's from the perspective of a survivor versus the organization.
1 second and
Absolutely.
carry on. You said that none of the leadership from CPCC or the CDS office have taken the training. So how do they know what they're talking about?
So they've course loaded people that have gone back with reports, mostly training development officers. I am not a training development officer. I was a public affairs officer by trade. And so we created this training with the idea of, again, what if being raped didn't have to cost you your career? When I did my training into this, one of the cases that came, obviously, that was being dealt with at the time was the Weinstein scandal in the States. And one thing that really hit home for me was when they interviewed the two reporters from the New York Times, they said that the real tragedy in people that prey on our young people isn't even the sexual assaults, as bad as they are. It's the fact that those people now feel like they've lost their potential. It kills their dreams. Mm-hmm. And that's what it did for me. It took away my dream of my university and everything else. So what if it didn't have to cost that? What if we could work on the problem and hopefully get it down to, like, you know, as minimal as we can, but the ones that we know that are out there that are better at hiding them or at finding them, what if that didn't have to mean that I'm going to have to hang up my uniform? What if I could be supported like I'm injured in any other way and I can then return and we don't have to lose these people? And that's sort of what we took it as, and that's what we've been doing.
And I appreciate that so much, because I also read in here how if you deal with things at the beginning and prevent or at least limit, but then there are those that need to be weeded out. So it's such a rational and reasonable approach.
There are, but the beauty of switching it to this, again, support first, is that you get more people coming forward because they don't feel like everything's going to run without them. They don't feel they're going to lose their position or their course or whatever else. If they feel they have a voice in what's going to happen next, they're more likely to come forward earlier. So then you don't get 30-year-old legacy cases down the line. You get somebody coming forward early on. We can support them right away and, again, help them come back to full strength.
Okay, one more question. Do I have time? Okay. You talked about a command level course, so you realize depending on where in the hierarchy things are, they need to be programmed differently. So can I ask, what does that look like?
The biggest difference between the command level and what we call the baseline training is just the scenarios. Other than that, the training is the same. And that was actually something that I ran into because when I first created a program, I was still in uniform. It was a military-specific program. It was a day long. And I was told I needed to create a different one now for command. And I said, why? And they said, well, you know, colonels and above, they're not the problem. It's the junior ranks that are the problem. So colonels and above, they could take like a half an hour. And I said, you want me to tell corporals they have to spend 8 hours, but a colonel only has to spend an hour? I would like to say that response disappeared right around the same time as the CDS, and we had 9 other general flag officers fall under allegations. Yeah, those complications went away.
Understandably.
So that's
Okay, thank you, Chair.
end of that round, and we'll move now for the next 5 minutes to Sean Casey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and let me add to the comments that you've heard from all of the colleagues around the table. This has been a remarkably courageous, touching, moving session. And for all of you to come forward in a public forum and go into such depth and detail and obvious trauma is something that I hope and expect will bear fruit in our reports. So thank you for that. I want to bring Ms. Douglas into the conversation a little more. And there's a couple of things that I want to ask you about. Maybe if I can start with, I know that you were a longtime employee of the Federal Department of Justice, and recently, or fairly recently, succeeded in getting them to agree to produce about $15,000 pages of information in connection with the purge. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Chair, Mr. Casey, thank you very much for that question. It took the LGBT Purge Fund a really substantial effort, challenging effort to work with the government to uncover an additional 15,000 pages of purge fund-related purge-related documents. A court settlement gave us access to 10,000 pages, but we knew there were a lot more, and it was a difficult journey. But eventually there was a settlement, and the court has now approved it, and we're in the process of finding those documents. These are historical documents that will tell the story of why this happened, why the government targeted to us LGBTQ folks in particular and looked at us as being somehow more fundamentally weak and unable or unworthy to serve our country. So we're getting those documents. We believe that if we don't have access to those documents and make them public, the people will hardly believe this could happen in Canada. And then if we think that they might not realize it could happen in Canada, then they'll probably say it didn't happen in Canada at all. And then after that, we know it just gets forgotten altogether. And we really think that, veterans, people who've served their country, deserve to be remembered and the full history to be known. We're publicizing these documents. Just recently through research, we actually uncovered the story of a young man whose name is on the Vimy Ridge Memorial, a gay man. And he's there, he's sacrificed, gave the ultimate sacrifice for our country. We have to tell these stories, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Ms. Park, you talked about the 2021 apology and the $850 million suit and the deficiencies in the apology. I'd like you to speak a bit more about that. What should have been there? How should it have been there? Do you have? Is there any way now to make it right?
Mr. Chair, what I find interesting is that the absence of women in that apology has not been identified. I was listening several months ago, and I realized that, whoa, we are not there. I contrast that to the government apology to the LGBTQ purge. We have not been invited to the Prime Minister's office. We have not sat up in the House of Commons upper balcony to have that statement said, we're sorry. This lack of acknowledgement that we have served, we did not volunteer to be harmed, it's long overdue, and women, because of that, feel that that somehow we haven't, it isn't deserved. So how to correct that? With the Queen's University Portal Project, we've been quietly operating for 5 years. We have not been identifying or advocating for demanding that this must change. It's a very good question. Does it make a difference? There are some who are in the class action who have said it does. There are others who say just drive on. I don't have a good answer for that, but it's a good question for a discussion to happen about it. Thank you.
So we're well over the time, so thank you, Mr. Casey. Et pour le prochain...
And for the next 2.5 minutes, we have Luc Desilets. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Wood, how many applications did you put in the first months of the first year after your service?
Aucune?
None?
I left. I knew that I was damaged, but I ran. I was permitted to move before my release. It took, actually, and this is a real thing, it took time for some of the symptoms to really appear.
When you did put in a first or a second application, were they refused, rejected, or accepted?
The first 3 applications I put in at the same time, PTSD and 2 other conditions, and all 3 were rejected that first time.
Vous avez présenté 3 demandes.
So 3, and the 3 were rejected. So how long did it take after, when you appealed and then you went before the tribunal?
It took 2 years, sir. Mr. Chair, it took 2 years for the appeal for PTSD to go through. I used the Bureau of Pension Advocates for assistance, and all that they did was include one piece of paper saying that I was mandated to sleep at that base because I was there for training. And that's how they finally connected it to my military service. Otherwise, I had just been raped.
Avez-vous déposé d'autres?
Did you have to, or did you put in any other applications in addition to those 3?
Yes, sir.
Oui.
Several.
7 au total.
Was it 7 extra in addition or in total?
Second.
C'est pas grave, non, regardez, on n'est pas une demande.
No, it doesn't have to be so precise.
Almost 10.
Est-ce qu'elles sont toutes?
Have they all been settled now?
No. My fibromyalgia claim, which it came in 2019. It took 2 years to diagnose, and then I did put in a claim on June 15th, 2021, and I am still awaiting a decision. It's not about getting the compensation, it's getting the treatment. That's what I need. That's why it's so frustrating. Wait times are not everything, but, they result in a lack of treatment, in conditions going untreated and undertreated for years.
Non. Monsieur le Président me dit que j'ai...
The chair has told me I am no longer entitled to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Allez, à vous, il va dire oui. Allez-y.
C'est toujours possible.
It's always possible for you to talk after the meeting ends. And thank you for your understanding.
Minutes now we have for Ms. Blaney for some questions.
Thank you, Chair. If I could come back to you, Donna, I think, if we had a world that was more survivor-focused, it would provide a lot more support, a lot more coming forward, and a lot more of a deterrent. So something for us to all think about in our lives. But you talked a lot, and a few people have mentioned this, that there needs to be more training, trauma-informed training for the VAC people who are working so closely with veterans. And I'm just curious, it makes me think about, if you discuss your experiences with any kind of sexual assault or harassment, and when you were in the CAF, it was never addressed or was swept under the table, or you didn't feel safe enough to come forward, how does VAC deal with that information? Is the veteran provided any sort of supports to figure out how to come forward with that story? Is there any information? I'm curious about how that communication happens between the CAF and VAC.
That's a really good question, because whenever somebody discloses to me, I treat it as if it's the first time they disclosed, right? Because it could be. And I know that people are disclosing to VAC case managers, and I know that, again, similar to anything else, if you're trained, great, you're confident in how you're going to support that person, but if you're not, you can fumble it and you can cause more damage. It's tough, and I know that it's tough because the system tries to protect your identity because it's, they don't want to cause you trauma, but at the same time, there needs to be a much more open conduit and a way for people to come forward and self-identify in a way that doesn't have any repercussions. I'm not sure what the answer is. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, and I think that is a big gap. I guess my last question, I don't have a lot of time, so do you want to add something, Christine? Or okay, just wanted to make sure. One of the things that we've noted very clearly is the data collection of both the CAF and VAC is very poor, and that lack of collecting data doesn't allow us to follow the paths of women through the system. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, and when I get more time, I'll come back to the rest of you on that question.
Sure. I know that in our training we use stats, and they're mostly American because that's where we can pull them from. So I can tell you that in the U.S., 2 out of every 3 survivors of MST will leave the military within a year if they're not given the right support. So we can extrapolate that and say it's probably similar in Canada because we're so closely linked. To which my response is always, knowing how starved our Canadian Armed Forces are for members, I don't think we can afford to lose 2 out of 3 of anybody, especially considering supporting somebody when they come forward should be a no-brainer. That should be a really easy fix. But as I've said, there still is no mandatory training for that really important trauma first aid, that mental health first aid when somebody comes forward.
Thank you for that, and we'll move now for the next 5 minutes to Fraser Tolmie.
Thank you very much for joining us today. And, we always say thank you for your service, and we do mean it. Ms. Wood, you've pointed out that after a horrendous experience that you ran away. Well, you've run back. And you're here for a fight. So we appreciate that. And so we recognize your hearts and what you're here to do and to make a positive change. Sometimes we live in a civilized society, but we don't always feel like we're civilized. So thank you for your time. I'd like to ask a couple of questions to you, Major, and I will do my best to get through the list that I have. Can you speak more to the training that your group has done, and what does the training look like, and kind of what are the results that you're seeing and that you can share with this group?
Sure. So the training that we've created, it's as a result of taking training on my own with the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services. It's one of the only groups in Canada that offers first responder training, which is just that was support to first disclosure, as well as training through mentors and violence prevention strategies. That's Dr. Jackson Katz's group in the States on bystander engagement intervention. So I've taken the stuff that I've learned and kind of implemented it into a military construct. And we use our stories as a way to sort of leverage that humanity and get in there and sort of, again, shift somebody's moral compass to make them see us more as human beings and stop objectifying us. The results that we've seen are nothing less than astounding. I've had 30 people in a room all at one point have that light bulb moment. I try to bring other survivors with me as much as possible so they can experience that same sort of feeling of incredible validation when all of a sudden you realize that people in this room get it. I get commanders reaching back to me afterwards saying, is it okay if I reach out to a survivor that I screwed support up 3 years ago? Would that make a difference in their healing now? In which case I always say, absolutely, please do that now. We get so much positive feedback. We do a pre and post course survey. Pre-survey, it's about 80% of people that come into the training with other training. I want to be clear. They come in with the training that's been established by the CAF already, but they are not confident in how to support somebody. That shifts to in the 90s afterwards. And now they know some things to say, and more importantly, they know what not to say. So now they feel like, you know what, when they're having those tough conversations, they're confident that they're going to be able to help somebody and not hurt them.
Well, I see that you're bridging your past experience and creating something new, so which is very entrepreneurial, and so that leads me to my next question. How could Veterans Affairs Canada do a better job of supporting female entrepreneurs like yourself?
I think we need more programming specifically for female entrepreneurs. I know that we have the ability, for example, within our RFP process to identify and say we'd like priority to be given to veteran-owned companies or female veteran-owned companies. And I want to be clear, that doesn't mean I want anybody left out. if all things being equal, maybe it might give you another point in the rubric when it's sort of examined. Right now, there's nothing like that exists. I'm competing, toe to toe with large academic institutions with, lots of experience and everything else. And we're coming in saying, hey, we've got some subject matter expertise as well as a psychology, and we're sort of trying to fight that fight. Yeah, I think that there could be programs created specifically for female veteran entrepreneurs, because this is a road that a lot of us would probably go down. We can't go back to the career necessarily that, again, we were abused and assaulted in doing. That's really traumatizing, and it really harms us. But we might not have the confidence necessarily to step out and say, yeah, I want to start something on my own. If there was, I don't want to even overstate and say a safety net, but if there was more support in that area, I think you'd see a lot more going that way.
Well, that's a great segue for my next question. And so that I understand in the U.S., and we've touched on this in previous meetings and a little bit tonight, a certain percentage of government contracts must go to veteran-owned businesses. What do you think of that policy that they have?
I personally think that policy is excellent. We've actually just recently registered for business in the U.S., and we've been invited to present at Fort Leavenworth in the fall. So we're starting to bridge into the U.S. I know that we brought up earlier what other countries are doing. We're unique in the fact that we are staffed by veteran survivors that want to make a positive change. When we've presented down in the U.S., which we've done now twice at conferences, it's been it's been really eye-opening for a lot of the other countries to see us, and we have standing invitations to attend some of these now.
Do I have time for one more question?
You've got about 10 seconds. So,
okay. All right.
I would probably,
okay. So, would you say that you're?
I think we'll stop you there, because I think by the time you get your question out, and so we'll move now to the last questioner for the second round of questioning, and that's Wilson Miao for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to you all joining us today for this important study. While I listened to your remarks, it really gave me heartfelt sympathy because, I was raised by my mother. I love her so much. I can't imagine something like this happen. And for all of you to be here today, sharing this is like stabbing on your wound again. I don't know how many times you guys have shared these stories to people to seek for help, but it's unacceptable. And at the same time, I understand, Donna, you mentioned right now, our military, we always look for new recruitments. But hearing these stories does give them a sense of, setback and say, why would I want to serve for a country that way? And I want to ask each of you, like, when you first started, what made you want to serve for Canada? And were you expecting to experience such trauma? Please go ahead.
Thank you for the question. When I joined, I wanted to keep girls and women safe. That was my idea. The Afghan war was still raging. Of seeing video of women in combat gear providing assistance to women and children, and to me that aligned with my beliefs and my desire. I never expected to experience what I did, but I do want to make sure that when we say, experience what I did, that it's not just military sexual trauma. That there's been a lot of resources and attention focused on that specific issue, and I myself have spent years being part of that voice. But there is more than just military sexual trauma that's affecting women. And I mean, number one, VAC table of disabilities. If I may, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry, sir, to just respond to something, Mr. Désolé, that you said earlier, that you felt shame. And as a man, and everyone's been saying, where's the oversight and what's... I have to say that I believe that you, sitting on this committee, are the oversight. And we are here bearing our souls, and we are willing to do this because you are the ones with the power. It's not us. We can come and we can talk, but we can't change it. It is on our elected representatives. And I mean, I would hope that over the last 2 weeks, as you were all back at your constituencies, that you took time to meet with women veterans to talk about their needs. If you're sitting on this committee, I would hope that all of you did that, because it is larger than just military sexual trauma. And I'll stop there because I know everybody wants to speak, but that I needed to make that point. Thank you.
And Michelle?
It's a great question. I joined the Canadian Armed Forces because I love Canada, because I believe in the fundamental values of Canada, the proposition that we are a just society, you're always pursuing the idea of equality and justice. These were things that chimed for me. And I realized how much service is of value to me, that serving others just was something that I was honored to do, proud to do. I did not expect the level of misogyny that I experienced in the Canadian Armed Forces. It was part and remains part of the culture of the military. This shocked me. I also did not expect to be so marginalized among the marginalized. So as a lesbian in the military, sometimes I still feel excluded, from other equality-seeking organizations. We have to be much bigger in our consideration of how we're thinking about the intersectional aspects, racialized, Indigenous, aging, trans, other veterans. We owe them respect and fundamental dignity. So that's the driver also of my work today. It's actually about service.
So we'll stop there. We're over the time for this round. This does conclude the second round of questioning. We are coming near the end of our meeting, but we do have, because of the start time of our meeting, we do have this room and the resources that go with it available to us for about till about 5:40. So what I'm going to do, if the witnesses are comfortable with it, is give ourselves about another 10 minutes or so that I can give each party one more round of 2.5 minutes. If our witnesses are comfortable with that's what I'll do. And it looks like that's the case. So I will move, the first questioner in the third round would be Kathy Wagentall for 2.5 minutes.
Chair, thank you very much. Again, thank you so much for being here. You are contributing to the potential for us to do a good job, so thank you. I'd just like to comment on or bring up this note in your information you provided to us, Donna. It talks about, and you said even the small things like a benefit to join a facility that offers female-only areas. This is something that our society and our cultures are losing and don't understand how they're destroying our culture and potential. Can you talk a little bit more about that? You're talking about after service, right?
Yes. So for me personally, going to the gym is very triggering for me. I was sexually assaulted in a military gym in 2012. So for me, going to the gym and a lot of my assault and harassment was around physical fitness. But I'm not alone in that. A lot of survivors of sexual assault have a hard time pursuing fitness for a number of reasons. One, because mentally we don't allow ourselves the gift of physical fitness because we see, potentially making ourselves more attractive is attracting that attention. It's wrong, but that's what we think. But of course, we also understand the mental health benefits and the physical benefits of physical fitness. Right now, there's no funding available to join a women's only gym.
Can I just add to that? So much of what's happening at the veterans level is because of what's happened while serving. Yes. And I had the opportunity to go on the HMCS Fredericton out in the middle of, it was a phenomenal experience, except for there are many things I noticed that would make me very uncomfortable to be a woman on that ship. Now, I don't think there was a lot of thought back in 1980, whatever, what is this going to mean to how we do things, or do we even want to go there?
joining the CAF is learning that you are heavily recruited, and we read all the headlines about how they want to reach that 25, but you're joining an organization that is not built for you in any way, shape, or form. The equipment's not built for you. The uniform's not built for you. You might not have a washroom in the building if it's a legacy. Nothing. You're not allowed. And for me, and I know that I've spoken to other women, serving my country meant learning that the people that I work shoulder to shoulder with, leaders, peers, I have to trust them with my lives, but I couldn't trust them with my body.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for there, Ms. Wagenthal. Thank you for that. And we will move to Churence Rogers for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our guest. Unfortunately, we have very little time. A couple of questions that I'll skip now in the interest of getting in that 2.5 minutes. I guess the main thing I want to know from all of you, and I'll give each of you an opportunity to comment, because we're doing this study, and at the end of the day, we're going to be making recommendations. So from your perspective, what do you prioritize as your number 1 or 2 recommendations that you'd want us to include in any study? Christine, could start with you, I guess.
Thank you for the question, Chair and Sir. My number 1 suggestion is a top to bottom review of the table of disabilities and making sure that there are no sex or gender biases left in them. Yeah.
Actually, that answers the question I was going to ask you as well about that table and what you would want to see done with that. So, Ms. Douglas next. Thanks, Christine.
I think historical education is helpful for grounding, for culture change. I think bringing in outside stakeholders for the journey of change that is underway in both the CAF and the military and Veterans Affairs is essential. I think a shifting culture that grounds respect and diversity in everything that's done at Veterans Affairs, and not mocking or judging the experience of people, but accepting it, believing it, and training is so important in that journey.
Thank you so much. Ms. Park?
I'm going to go larger or higher level. With the veterans who are in Canada, when they leave the military, they disappear. They are an amazing resource at the local level. We are not tapping into that. And I would give the example of work that I'm involved in right now around emergency management, disaster response. And actually, the question I ask is, where are your veterans in your local community pitching in? The reserves aren't going to be called. The Canadian military, the Reg Force isn't going to be called. It's a request of final assistance. They're the force of last resort. Where are the reserves? They're living in a community, but not wearing a uniform. And where are the veterans? And women veterans organize. That's what we should be using.
And and we have concluded the time for this round, but Ms. Rigadel, if you have just a brief response,
super fast.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Honestly, just far more women-centered, dedicated programming for women. Thank you.
Well, that was incredibly brief. Thank you for that. Et maintenant, nous avons...
And now we have Mr. Desilets. You have your chance to continue your conversation, but only for 2.5 minutes. Well, we'll see about that. Ms. Wood, perhaps I've misunderstood. Alluded to a report that had been tabled that had never been made public. What is that?
I was referring to the GBA Plus analysis that is done by VAC. I believe every department of the Canadian government is required to do a gender-based analysis to... Do you understand what that is?
Très bien, mais pourquoi?
Yes, yes. But I'm not familiar with the report. Has it been made public?
Made public despite numerous calls for it to be made public. Like I'm talking for a long time.
Okay.
And we need to see it because I don't know how
On va le
intersectional.
voir.
We will see it.
I don't know how intersectional they were, and I don't know how deeply they got into it. If they got it right, we need to know.
C'est assez difficile.
Well, it's, not a state secret, or it shouldn't be, should it? We'll see. Did you have to appear before the tribunal, the Veteran Affairs Tribunal, with your applications and reviews?
No, I always appealed myself or with the assistance of the Bureau of Pensions Advocates, BPA, and was either successful or not. I've never gone as far as going to the VRAB board, the Veteran Review Appeal Board. I've never gone that far. I might. It takes so much effort, though.
Mettez-moi un mot là.
Could you put, name that? Can you give me...
So much time. The conditions, the medical conditions I have make it difficult for me to focus. It makes it difficult for me to keep my things organized. So different doctors, notes, appointments, records, receipts, anything like that. It's also incredibly difficult to have to say again and again that I have been injured in this way. And I mean, every single application that I fill out, I have to say, I was sexually assaulted in 2011. This is how it happened. This is what happened after. This is why I have PTSD. And now I have this. And I link it to the medications I took for PTSD or just the mental stress that came out and presented in my body. I have to do it again and again and again. And that is what I mean about it being exhausting, dehumanizing. It is embarrassing. Like I said, I'm ashamed I left. I advocate alongside women who went through what I went through, and they stayed in. But I didn't. I knew, without knowing who raped me, I could never be safe in a room. And so I shouldn't have to write on every form what my primary diagnosis was and all of the details to make it obvious. It's like I'm trying to dumb things down enough that they can understand and make the connection. And I'm exhausted from it. And it's just, like I said, there's claims I haven't put in that I need to. I need to because I need care, I need coverage, I need treatment. I will stop there. I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time.
No, thank you. Thank you. Nobody feels at all like that. I think what you've just told us is incredibly valuable information for this committee to know and to understand. I think it's something that many of us have heard far too often, the need to continually tell the story that is so hard for you to tell. And so don't feel like you've taken too much time. We appreciate what you've just shared with us without question. And we will now finish our questioning for today with Rachel Blaney for the last 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. And again, like I said earlier, I'm sorry that you have to bleed so that we can actually do something with it. So I am going to come back to my very unsexy, but I think so important issue and question around data collection, because I believe that what we don't track, we don't see. So talk about making invisible. So I'm going to start with Ms. Park. Remember, I only have about 2.5 minutes, and I want to get the last, all three of you in there, so I apologize for that. But if you could speak to that.
The lack of collection by the CAF makes it very difficult for the VAC to have a history. I'll give you the one example that surprised me, but we have a saying at Servicewomen Salute, hashtag I am not surprised, and that was deployment. Women sent on deployment, they did not record where they were, what they did, so there is no record. We have to crowdsource now. Those deployment experiences I would say more logically, harsher conditions will have implications for later health care and other issues. And so if I had a request, we've tried a study. They have tried to do a study. They've been able to find women back to 2000, but they say that isn't possible to find them earlier than that. There have been 399 missions since 1945. Women we know started in 1975, being sent on international deployments. The only thing we can do is, and that's what we are undertaking, is crowdsourcing.
Chair, we're looking for these purge victims, purge survivors. We'd like to talk to their family. We don't know how to find them. We don't have the data to know who they are or how to reach them. We think the government might be able to help by doing much more broadcast kind of information and awareness raising. We need this data because we know that this is an aging group and that they're in their final years in many cases, and we want them to know in this period of their life that they are respected as veterans and that they can get aging help by Veterans Affairs, by the government, that in many cases, as I've said, has betrayed them. But without this data, we don't even know what we're dealing with to try to resource the help for them.
Anyone else that wanted to respond briefly? We are sort of at the end of time, but we can, if there's a brief response, I can enable that.
I was just going to say that if Veterans Affairs and CAF tracked injuries and claims, if we tracked all of these different metrics, I guess, data points, then we would know what programs are needed. We could collect data about how effective they are. And that's the whole point of it, right? We need to be transparent and accountable to the public. These are taxpayer dollars. The programs, if they are not designed for you, they're not going to work for you. And collecting that data is like, it's got to be part of the backbone of all, or the foundation of all the work that goes forward. Because, like I said, you can't treat it if you can't name it. You can't name it if you don't track it and have the data. So, thank you.
Thank you, and we'll have to close there, but I do want to sincerely thank all of our witnesses today for your moving and impactful testimonies that you provided to this committee. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone here that it was very powerful, and I think is going to be very important to us in our deliberations and in the recommendations that we make going forward. So know that you have made a difference today, and thank you for your courage and for your time with us today. And with that, we'll close the meeting. Meeting adjourned.